So, the Supreme Court is finally taking up the abortion issue, and in this case, there's actually a strong chance they're going to overturn one of the worst decisions in Supreme Court history, that, of course, being Roe v. Wade. I mean, that's an awful legal decision, and one which should be overturned, and many people are now predicting that it will be, and you can add me to that list as well, because I listened to all of the oral arguments in this case, which was a painful experience that I never want to do again, but I did, and it ended up being an interesting experience, and I will say I'm not exactly sure how far they're going to go, if they're going to completely gut it and simply go back to complete neutrality, or they're going to have certain restrictions and whatnot, mostly because some of the justices seemed pretty wishy-washy on what was going on. But, regardless, it does seem as though there's going to be movement on the abortion issue, which has not made the Democrats very happy, and I can see why. They have been very invested in this particular issue of baby killing for quite a long time, and they have gone to their defenses of it, and they have tried their hardest to not look like demons in the process. If only they could do so, because even in the case where you're in the middle of the courtroom, the plaintiff in this case, who is the abortion advocate, ended up sounding pretty ridiculous at times. I mean, it got to the point where Justice Clarence Thomas, who, bless him, he was the best part of listening to this entire thing, asked a particularly striking question to the plaintiff.
Some years after we decided Casey, we had a case out of South Carolina, I believe, involved a woman who had been convicted of criminal child neglect because she ingested cocaine during pregnancy. In her case was post-viability, so it doesn't fit in the facts of this case. If she had ingested cocaine pre-viability and had the same negative consequences to her child, do you think the state had an interest in enforcing that law against her?
The state may have, Your Honor. The state can certainly regulate to serve its interests in fetal life and in women's health. Those particular laws tend to undermine both of those interests because they deter women from seeking prenatal care.
Did you really have to go with the prenatal? I have a question for the plaintiff. Did you really have to go with the prenatal argument? Did you have to say that, oh, well, the problem with cocaine laws and preventing babies from being addicted to cocaine out of the womb is that women won't get prenatal care? Did you really have to go to that direction? I mean, it's pretty indicative of your pro-abortion stance and the sort of utter nonsense that leftists say on these sorts of issues. But I'm surprised you said it that outrightly. I'm surprised you were that direct about it, because this is not a defensible position to the majority of people. This is an extreme position, and guess what? Extreme positions don't win any elections. And that moves on to our second argument against this sort of thing, and that is the pragmatic argument. Simply that Republicans will end up losing the elections in 2022 if they make abortion a huge issue. This is something I completely disagree with, for a number of reasons. Firstly, the idea that the majority of the country is pro-choice and thus pro-abortion is simply inaccurate, and this was fairly well shown by the People's Pundit, Richard Barris, his tweets down in the description, analyzing polling data to show that pro-choice people who designate themselves as pro-choice, are not against this particular law. 15 weeks, they're totally fine with banning it, because this comes, and the idea that pro-choicers are going to vote for the pro-abortion Democrats comes from a misunderstanding of this entire debate, because this debate is one of the very few issues in which there are actually three completely distinguishable sides to the argument. Because there is first the pro-life position, which is abortion is murder and wrong, and thus should be illegal. And then there is the pro-abortion argument, which is abortion is good and should be allowed at any time, in any place, at any circumstances, based on the woman's discretion alone because it's a good thing. And then you have the pro-choice argument, which I'm going to represent using the old 90s Democrat consensus, which is simply that abortion is wrong, it is evil, but it is necessary. And when you understand that, you can start to gain a complete view of what's going on here, because the pro-choice crowd is actually much closer to the pro-life crowd than to the pro-abortion crowd. Just compare their premises. For the pro-life people, they agree with one of the two premises of the pro-choice crowd. They agree with the premise that abortion is wrong. And for the pro-abortion crowd, they agree with neither premise, because they neither agree that abortion is wrong, they believe it is a positive good, and they don't believe that abortion is necessary. They believe it is something that they want. It's not just something that arises out of necessity, but out of convenience for these people. And that is how they always get portrayed, and rightly so, as demon-like. I mean, you can just see it in how every time they go out to protest, they can't help but themselves, but ending up sounding like demon spawn screaming for child sacrifice, which, you know, is kind of basically what they're doing anyway. And so what ends up happening is that the pro-choice crowd is much more alienated by the pro-abortion crowd than they ever are by the pro-life crowd, because the pro-life crowd is still appealing to an issue of which they at least generally agree, and that is the idea that abortion is wrong. And the argument that the Republicans are going to lose out in elections is based on the idea that the Democrats could even articulate the moderate pro-choice position at this point, which I don't think they can. And even if they tried, the Republicans would have a heyday, bringing up all sorts of past incidences of people showing the pro-abortion argument and showing what they actually want. You could go to Governor Blackface. You could talk about AOC. You could do the abortion parades. You could go all over the place to show exactly how depraved these people get. And on top of all of that, I just want to talk for a bit and rant about the utter nonsense that was that Supreme Court oral arguments, because it was all completely awful. I mean, if we're talking about the legal basis for Roe v. Wade, there is none. There is no legal basis whatsoever. You might say, well, what about the right to privacy? Oh, it's all about the right to privacy, that you simply have a right to not show give your medical data over to the government. You are allowed to privately practice, and the government has no standard in that. Okay, that's great. I'm totally in favor of privacy on most occasions. I'm totally in favor of privacy, particularly in medical decisions. That's why I'm against things like vaccine mandates. That's why I'm against the things like the Affordable Care Act medical database. That's why I'm against those sorts of things. It would be so great if the Supreme Court ever deigned to actually extend those rights to anything other than abortion. The fundamental problem here is that this legal reasoning for abortion and being legal, is not reasoning, but excuse-making. And you can tell this by the fact that the court never decides to use this in any other case. Or even if they do, it's so inconsistent that you could never, ever expect it to be an actual legal standard of which can be applied and consistently understood by literally anyone. If we were actually to do that and use the original language of Roe, what we would end up with is that, first of all, the FDA wouldn't exist at all, because guess what? Why should I have to ask a government bureau as to whether I get to take any experimental drug I want? That would be immediately thrown out, on top of all of the other things. NSA spying, you could go on and talk about things like FISA courts, the FBI, all over the place. There are so many privacy violations going on all over American society, particularly within the government. I mean, you could even extend this out to people who are acting as government actors, in which case you could talk about companies like Google, you could talk about companies like Facebook, and all over the place, and talk about privacy. You could do that. You could have a legal standard. But they don't. They don't have a legal standard. It's excuse making, and that isn't just in Roe. It is all over the place within the Supreme Court. Just take, for instance, one of the biggest issues in this particular case, and that being stare decisis. The idea that the court should just completely ignore all of the actual legal arguments and simply decide based on what they decided before, even if what they decided before was, of course, completely wrong. Stare decisis is regularly ignored by the court in any case in which it deems it fit. All stare decisis exists to do is to lower the caseload for the Supreme Court, because they can simply say, well, we already decided this, go away. That's all they need to do. And that's fine. I'm totally okay with that. But I don't want to listen for 30 minutes infinitely, just Justice Breyer talking over and over and over again about how this is a principled thing, that stare decisis is totally something which we should follow principledly. Because Justice Breyer doesn't believe that. No one believes that in the court, except maybe Justice Roberts, because he's delusional. But everyone else understands, both people on the plaintiff's side, people on the defense, every single justice, once again, except for Roberts, understands that stare decisis is utter nonsense. That's why it makes no difference, and why most of the other justices barely deign to even touch on it. And even when they do, it's just to say, well, it doesn't matter. That's what ends up happening. And this is all over the place in the court, and it's one of the major problems. There are so many supposed legal standards that have simply nothing to do with anything at all, and are so inconsistently applied that you could never actually describe a rule as to how it works. Another example of this is, of course, standing and latches on occasion. You get all sorts of these things where there's just no test. There's no legal test. There's no legal standard. There's no legal actual statutory law that's designed to show you what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. It's just whatever the court thinks at that particular time. And really, this is one of the major symptoms of the court having gone out of control, which is an issue that I've always had a massive problem with. When I did one of my first videos on, I don't suggest you go back to it. It's too much editing and that sort of stuff. I had a lot of problems, too many jump cuts. But I've had this problem for such a long time, and really, all you need to do is kick out half the court. All of these people who are just pretending that this is at all sincere, just kick them out, because frankly, they don't deserve to be there. They don't deserve to be sitting there making law from the bench, or pretending that they care about any of the legal standards or even the Constitution. I'm sick of it. Just stop. And that's why I find a lot of this super painful, but also kind of fascinating, because I get some sort of sick pleasure from that pain. I'm not going to say I'm a masochist, but, you know, I don't want to do it again, but I also kind of do. And I think that's where I'm going to leave you guys off. If you enjoyed that video, do subscribe down below, and check me out on other platforms. I am all over the place. I'm on BitChute, I'm on Odyssey, I'm on Rumble, I'm on Brighteon, I'm on all those places. I'm also on Getter, Gab, and Minds, if you want to check out text posts there. I'm KelKidman, this has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.